¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes. Seguimos en el Congreso Internacional de Astronáutica aquí en Guadalajara, en Expo Guadalajara. Mi nombre es Mario Arreola y en esta ocasión estamos con el doctor Robert Zubrin, quien es el presidente de la Mars Society, la Sociedad de Marte. Y vamos a hablar en inglés para la entrevista.
Hola.
Robert, hola. Thank you for this interview. And I understand that the Mars Society is an outcome of your book, and your book is named A Case for Mars.
That's right.
Could you briefly tell us what is this about?
Right. Well, in 1996, I published a book called The Case for Mars, which explained how we could send Mars in our own time with the kind of technologies we have, how we could proceed from there to explore Mars, to build bases on Mars, to build settlements on Mars, and ultimately terraform Mars, and why it was important for the human future that we do it. And a lot of people read this book. I got a very powerful response. I got 4,000 letters from people all over the world asking all sorts of questions, but there was one question that they all had beneath the surface, which was, how do we make this happen? And I looked at all these different kinds of people, businessmen, engineers, scientists, ordinary working men and women, and I said, if we could pull these people together, we could have a force that could make humans to Mars a reality. And so we sent out invitations. We held the founding conference of the Mars Society in Boulder, Colorado. 700 people came from 40 different countries.
When was this?
This was 1998. And we created the Mars Society. And we have members here in Mexico, and we'd like to pull them together into a strong national chapter of the Mars Society Mexico, because I think there's a lot that this country can do in space.
Absolutely. Do you think if we call for a conference in, let's say, Mexico City, people will come from there?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do.
And possibly from other parts of Latin America?
Yes. I think we could also get them from many parts of Latin America. I just had our conference in Washington, the international conference. We had some people there from Mexico. We also had from Peru, from Brazil, Colombia. Came all the way to Washington. So certainly many of them will come to Mexico City. But mostly in this conference, we would be interested in pulling together the Mars Society in Mexico, and then perhaps later we could have a Latin America-wide conference, possibly in Mexico, maybe in Peru, who knows?
Like inviting speakers?
Yes. Scientists, people working on space, and also people with ideas of what it will mean to the human future for humans to expand to other planets.
Right. Would you be there?
I'd be happy to come.
Okay. And you're invited.
Okay.
Good. So, what is the concept of going to Mars? Mars is our distant neighbor, as I used to call it in my talks about Mars, because it's our nearest neighbor towards the inner planets, but it's also...
It's the closest planet that has the resources that would allow for human settlement.
Okay.
All right. And also to support local life, so there's great scientific interest in whether life ever evolved on Mars, because if it did, that would mean that life evolves on most planets where conditions are suitable, and since we now know that the universe is filled with planets going around stars, if the development of life on Earth from chemistry was not just a freak chance, but something normal to planets, at least normal to planets within the right temperature zone around the star, then life is everywhere. It means intelligent life is plentiful. It means we're not alone. This is something that thinking men and women have wondered about for thousands of years. But furthermore, because these resources exist on Mars to support the evolution of life, they also exist to support the development of civilization. And if we are going to become a multi-planet spacefaring species, Mars is where we're going to start.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Not the moon.
No, because the moon is much more impoverished. You know, to compare Mars to the moon to the previous age of European ocean exploration, Mars compares to the moon as the American continents compare to Greenland. You know, okay, you know, here we have the American continents, North America, South America, and Greenland. Europeans reached Greenland first.
Sure.
500 years before Columbus, Europeans went to Greenland. But it was too poor an environment to establish a real civilization. So the Norse set up outposts there, okay, but it wasn't until Columbus that we found a place where we could really settle and create a new society, and in fact several new societies.
Well, then maybe the moon will be an outpost.
Yes, no, certainly. And in fact, I think if we have a Humans to Mars program, the same hardware that allows us to send humans to Mars will also allow us to send people to the moon and even to near-Earth asteroids. And so we will do all those things at the same time. But the main goal will be Mars.
We just came out from a very interesting presentation from Elon Musk, in which he presents SpaceX journey to Mars, let's put it that way. And he talked about establishing a colony in Mars within the next 100 years, which is a long, long time. But you mentioned that could be earlier.
Well, yes, I think if we really wanted to,
Okay.
we could have our first people on Mars in 10 years. I think from a technical point of view, sending people to Mars today is less difficult than sending men to the moon was in 1961, and we were there 8 years later. Now, if we don't have that kind of commitment, it will take longer. But it is not beyond our time. Now, Musk today also presented a very futuristic concept for a ship, not just for visiting Mars, but for colonizing Mars. I think some of the ideas he presented were very good. I would modify them somewhat. I don't think we need a 500-ton spaceship. I think we can do it with a 50-ton spaceship. I think that we don't have to have the big spaceship go all the way to Mars and back. If you do that, it can only be used once every 4 years. Instead, what you should have is the big spaceship only goes to an orbit just less than Earth escape. So it goes into a big loop, takes it out about as far as the moon, and it would then come back and in a week and be able to be reused again. But what it would do is it would shoot payloads off to Mars. Okay, and those payloads would fly to Mars and they would land, and we could, with the same booster spaceship, we could send 10 times the payload to Mars, because we could use it 5 times every Mars launch opportunity, which occurs every 2 years, instead of once every other opportunity. Now, we could send 10 times as many people, send 1,000 people instead of 100 people, or we could make the ship smaller, make it 1/10 the size, and still send 100 people. And that's what I would do. So instead of needing a 500-ton spaceship, we could do it with a 50-ton spaceship, which is something that we could get to orbit with the kind of rockets we're going to have within just a very few years right now. So that kind of mission plan that he outlined could be done with smaller spacecraft, and not 100 years from now or 50 years from now, but 15, 20, 25 years from now.
Okay. That's excellent. You were also telling me that Mexico can get involved in an experiment in orbit around the Earth to find out what the effect of Martian-like gravity could have in rodents.
Right. I think, look, we're going to send astronauts to Mars, and on the very first mission, they're going to spend over a year on Mars, and ultimately Martian settlers will spend their whole lives on Mars, and some will even be born on Mars and grow up on Mars. So we need to find out what the effects of Mars gravity are on people from Earth, and also on people born on Mars. Well, the first way, in medical research, we always test things on animals before we test them on people. So what I am proposing is that Mexico build a small spacecraft, perhaps 1 meter in diameter, that would spin. And by spinning, it creates artificial gravity. And in that spacecraft, we put a crew of mice.
Okay.
And they would live in that spacecraft and for several months, during which time they would reproduce. They would have children who would then grow up in Mars gravity.
Okay.
And at the end of several months, we would have that spacecraft re-enter, parachute down, land, and we would recover it, and we would see what the effects of Mars gravity are, both on the adult mice who were born and raised on Earth, and on their children who were born and raised in Mars gravity. And this would be the first data that anyone has of the effect of Mars gravity on mammals born on Earth. And this is NASA has never done anything like this. The Russians have never done anything like this. The Europeans have never done anything like this. But I believe it is absolutely within the means of Mexico to create such a spacecraft. It could be done at one of the major universities here, and it would also be very educational for the students to design and build this spacecraft. And then we could have NASA launch it. Weighing only 100 kilograms, it could be a hitchhiker payload going along for the ride on a launch of a much larger satellite, or, for instance, the delivery of cargo to the space station. It could be delivered to space, and so forth. And this would be a way for Mexico to get into human space exploration at a very small cost, not millions of dollars or billions of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, the kind of budget that is realistic.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's doable. Let's find which university or universities
Right.
would like to entertain this idea, and
Right.
We can go from there.
Yes. So I would like to see, first of all, a conference pulled together in Mars Society Mexico.
Yes.
And perhaps the Mexican Space Agency can help organize it.
Sure.
I hope that we can get my book out here in Mexico in Latin American Spanish.
I offer to
Yes, that would help spread the word. But also for the Mexican Space Agency to launch this project, to pull together, find one or more universities that would like to participate. Maybe there could be some industrial partners willing to help. But to build this spacecraft and get an agreement from NASA to launch it. And I think this would be the sort of thing that NASA would agree to. They want to have international collaborators, and if you build the spacecraft and it's kept modest in size, I think they'd be willing to deliver it and be a great example of North American collaboration in space, and a way to get some new science which needs to be done and which no one else is doing.
That sounds great. Let's work on it.
All right.
Okay. Doctor, could you please tell some message to our students, that people watching?
Yeah, sure. If you're a student and you're watching this, my message to you is learn your science and your engineering, and you can be an explorer of new worlds. And if you're a person who is an adult and you're past your education, and so you can't do this personally, I would say that you should want Mexico to do this, because Mexico should be a nation of the first rank, and nations of the first rank should do first rank things, and this is one of them. And if Mexico is doing this, it will tell your children to learn their science so they can be a pioneer of new worlds. And a few of them will go into the space program, others will go into industry, into engineering, into government, into all sorts of things, but they'll have a career and they'll be able to make major contributions that will advance human life here and around the world. So let's help make this happen.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Mucho gusto.
Muchas gracias. Nos despedimos. Mario Arreola, Agencia Espacial, Entrevista hacia el espacio. Hasta la próxima.